Next week on The Twilight Zone, we let you in on an extravagant practical joke, a man who wants to convey an illusion that the world is coming to an end. Remember when television didn't hold your hand? When a half-hour show could mess with your head, question your morals, and still scare the hell out of you, all in black and white? Well, from 1959 to 1964 on CBS, The Twilight Zone wasn't just a TV show, it was a weekly trust fall, created and hosted by Rod Serling. It took sci-fi, fantasy, and horror and used them to talk about fear, prejudice, greed, and human nature long before television was allowed to do that. Some episodes shocked you, some made you feel uncomfortable, and some didn't really hit until years later when you realized that they were about you. Today, we're going to count down 15 weird facts about The Twilight Zone, from the behind-the-scenes accidents that shaped the show to the creative risks that almost got it erased, to the subtle details that rewired pop culture forever. And trust us, you won't believe what happens at number 1. So, if you love classic TV, late-night reruns, and stories that still hit way too close to home, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and let's step into another dimension. Before The Twilight Zone, Rod Serling was already a big deal. Emmy wins, critical acclaim, the guy was writing hard-hitting dramas about racism and war and injustice, and audiences loved it. You know who didn't love it? The sponsors.
Who's the culprit? Is it the network, the sponsor? It sure is not the FCC.
No, it's certainly not the FCC. Ideally speaking, of course, it's a combination of culprits in this case, Mike. It's partly network, it's principally agency and sponsor. In many ways, I think it's the audience themselves.
In the 1950s, the cigarette companies and appliance manufacturers buying ad time had enormous creative control, and they hated controversy. If Serling's script made anyone uncomfortable, especially customers in certain parts of the country, the sponsor would gut it. Serling hit his breaking point when he wrote a teleplay inspired by the real-life murder of Emmett Till, which was a story which purported to tell what was the aftermath, the alleged kidnapping in Mississippi of the Till boy, the young Chicago Negro.
And I wrote the script using black and white. By the time the network and sponsors finished with it, the victim wasn't black, the setting wasn't the South, and the word lynching had been scrubbed entirely.
What started as a searing indictment of racial violence became nothing, a neutered story with no teeth. That's when Serling figured something out. If he set his stories on distant planets, or if he made the villain a robot, or turned prejudice into a supernatural curse, the censors, well, they suddenly stopped paying attention. As Serling put it, a Martian can say things that a Republican or a Democrat can't. Now, aliens and monsters became his camouflage. Network execs thought that they were approving harmless sci-fi nonsense, but Serling was all the while sneaking in sharp critiques of McCarthyism, racism, nuclear paranoia, and everything else that they tried to silence him for in the first place. And the irony? The people trying to shut him down accidentally made him more dangerous. Without those clueless 1950 censors, The Twilight Zone might not have ever existed. We'd probably just remember Rod Serling as the guy who wrote a couple of forgotten stage plays. Next week on The Twilight Zone, Jack Warden, John Danon, and Jean Marsh appear in a bizarre tale of a man and a woman.
I don't understand it either. Thank you and good night.
Censorship didn't stop Rod Serling. It handed him a cloaking device. A TV network almost killed The Twilight Zone before it even existed. In 1957, Rod Serling wrote a script called The Time Element. It had everything that we now associate with the zone. You had time travel, creeping dread, and a twist that burrows into your brain and refuses to leave. The story followed a man who visits a psychiatrist because he keeps having the same nightmare. In his dream, he's in Honolulu on December 6th of 1941, the day before Pearl Harbor.
How could it be 1941? It's 1958. How could it be 1941? It's 1958. 1958.
Every night the dream lasts longer, and the man becomes convinced that it isn't a dream at all. He's traveling back in time, and he's going to die there. CBS executives read it, and they hated it. It was too bleak, too confusing, it was too out there for television audiences. So they did the polite executive thing. They bought the script, they paid out Serling, and then they stuffed it in a drawer. A year later, producer Burt Granite was digging through CBS's dead pile looking for material for Westinghouse Desilu Playhouse. That's when he found Serling's forgotten script. Desi Arnaz, yes, that Desi Arnaz, saw something special. He ignored the network's doubts and he aired the time element on November 24th of 1958. Now, back then, networks judged success by one thing: mail. And after the time element aired, the CBS mailroom got buried. Thousands of letters poured in. Viewers didn't just say that they liked it, they said that it haunted them. They loved the exact twist that executives thought audiences were just too dumb to understand. CBS suddenly realized they made a massive mistake. The same network that didn't trust audiences to get it was now staring at a hit buried under a mountain of stamped envelopes.
Mr. Jensen. Pete. Pete, are you all right? Oh, sure, I'm all right. Why? Well, this morning you seemed so sure it was another year.
They called Rod Serling, they gave him a green light, and the Twilight Zone was born. One script, one drawer, and an audience that refused to be underestimated. The scariest thing on television wasn't a monster. It was the guy calmly explaining what you were about to see. When the Twilight Zone was first developed, Rod Serling didn't plan on being the narrator.
Antiseptically, rigidly, acceptable show. Why it bore no relationship at all to what we had purported to say initially.
He wanted a big, booming voice of God type, someone theatrical, someone legendary. They even approached Orson Welles, one of my personal favorites, but the man who once caused a nationwide panic with War of the Worlds. The problem, Welles wanted too much money. Other voice actors sounded too polished, too announcery, too horror movie cheesy. As the deadline for the first season crept closer, other options fell through, and Serling reluctantly offered to try it himself. He didn't see himself as a performer. He thought he looked stiff on camera.
And now, Mr. Serling, this may look to you like any dismal, dark, and dingy alley that lies skulking off the myriad shadow places off the main drags. Actually, it's the private domain of leprechauns and elves, and supplies the locale of next week's Twilight Zone.
He thought his voice sounded too clipped, but there was no one else, so Serling stepped in front of the camera and didn't act at all. He just stood there, sometimes leaned against a set piece, looking straight into the lens, calm, detached, like a wary journalist who already knew how the story was going to end and felt a little sorry for you anyway. That cool noir presence became inseparable from the show. And then there was the cigarette. It wasn't a prop, it was actually an organ. Serling was a legendary chain smoker, and in many of those intros, the cigarette is right there, smoke curling into the frame as he explains that you've just crossed over into another dimension. That sandpaper rasp in his voice, that wasn't acting, that was just the nicotine. In Season 1, Serling mostly narrated off-screen, but his on-camera role expanded as the series continued, and audiences loved it. The man who didn't see himself on camera became the face of the Twilight Zone. The Twilight Zone didn't always sound like the Twilight Zone. For the first season, Rod Serling went high alert. He hired Bernard Herrmann, Alfred Hitchcock's go-to composer, and the man behind the screaming violins in Psycho. You know it. Yeah, that one. Herman's original theme was elegant and orchestral and unsettling. It felt like a classic Hollywood thriller. It was smart, it was moody, and sophisticated too. And honestly, it didn't stick in your head. It didn't make your skin crawl, and it definitely didn't sound like something that you hum on a playground when something weird happened. When Season 2 rolled around, the producers wanted something a bit stranger, something edgier, something that sounded less like a film score and more like pure anxiety. So they turned to French composer Mario Constant. And here's the twist. Constant didn't actually write the Twilight Zone theme as a song. He'd recorded a bunch of short experimental music cues for a library. The producers grabbed two of them, Irange 3 and Milieu 2, and literally stitched them together. 4 ear-ringing guitar notes, a nervous bongo beat. It was experimental. It was almost alien instrumentation. It wasn't polished, it was quite jagged, and it was perfect. Those messy little mashups became one of the most recognizable sounds in television history. Those 4 notes are instant shorthand for something is very wrong. You don't even need the picture. Your brain just fills in the rest. Here's the kicker. Mario Constant, the man behind one of the most famous themes in TV history, well, he didn't even realize what he had created. He lived in France, and he never watched The Twilight Zone while it was airing. He only figured it out years later when those royalty checks suddenly got a lot bigger. The most unsettling sound in television? Well, that was an accident.
Future movie stars had to earn it by screaming at vending machines, arguing with gremlins, and overacting their hearts out in black and white. The Twilight Zone, it wasn't stunt casting. It was a pressure cooker that either broke actors or forged legends. Before he was Captain Kirk, William Shatner delivered one of the most parodied performances in TV history in Nightmare at 20,000 feet. Trapped on an airplane, sweating through his suit, Shatner sees a monster on the wing and absolutely loses his mind. And that wasn't even his first breakdown. In Nick of Time, he's obsessed with a fortune-telling napkin dispenser. Between the devil-headed machine and the airplane gremlin, Shatner spent the early 60s being psychologically tortured by inanimate objects. Then there's Burt Reynolds, before the mustache, before the swagger. The guy who plays Jeremy is gonna have to know what it's all about. A mature guy, who knows the score, a guy with some zazz, a guy with some moxie, guy who understands a tertiary motivation. In The Bard, Reynolds plays an actor doing a painfully accurate parody of Marlon Brando's method acting style. The mumbling, the slouching, the t-shirt, proof that even then Burt had that unmistakable wink. Robert Redford played Death in Nothing in the Dark, calm, kind, radiant. The episode flips expectations completely. Redford sells it so effortlessly that it remains one of the most emotional episodes of the series. And Burgess Meredith appeared in 4 episodes, more than any other lead actor, including Time Enough at Last and The Obsolete Man. I'm not going to starve to death anyway. Lots of food. Food enough to last for years and years and years. He became Serling's go-to everyman, thoughtful, fragile, and usually crushed by the universe. And one last twist. While Meredith holds the record for most starring roles, the actual most seen face in The Twilight Zone might belong to Robert McCord, who appeared in dozens of episodes as background characters and extras. He's the show's unofficial Where's Waldo, and once you notice him, well, you can't stop spotting him. The Twilight Zone didn't just launch careers, you really stress-tested them. Television production schedules in the early 60s were intense, but The Twilight Zone operated on another level entirely. Isn't Mr. Schwimmer coming? Yes, Mr. Schwimmer is coming. He'll be here at 8. Good. Most prestige dramas took 10 to 12 days just to film a single episode. Rod Serling didn't have that luxury, though. A typical Twilight Zone episode went from idea to finished broadcast in about 8 days total. Pre-production, 1 or 2 days. Filming, 3 to 5 days of brutal 12 to 14-hour shoots. Post-production, a day or 2 of frantic editing, scoring, and Serling's iconic narration, often happening simultaneously. This wasn't a marathon, it was a series of weekly sprints. And because Serling was writing nearly 2/3 of the episodes himself, scripts often arrived just in time. Guest stars would show up on very short notice, sometimes the day of filming, and were just handed a script packed with dense philosophical monologues. What? What are you looking at, Bob? No table reads, minimal rehearsal. You just learned your lines in the makeup chair and you hope for the best. Directors didn't have the luxury of perfection either. If an actor stumbled but the moment felt right, they kept it. That's why The Twilight Zone has that raw, almost theatrical energy. It feels like live television because, well, for everyone involved, it basically was. Meanwhile, the editors were fighting their own war. Film was physically cut and taped together. If a shot didn't work, they couldn't reshoot. It was already gone. They relied on clever cutaways, sound design, and sheer ingenuity to save scenes during marathon shifts. Here's the wild part. The pace actually helped protect the show's vision. Network executives had little opportunity to interfere. By the time someone at CBS decided an ending was too dark, well, the episode was already shipping out. The human cost was real. The pace wrecked Serling's health. He joked about being the oldest young man in Hollywood. When the show ended in 1964, he was only 39, but he looked decades older. And now, Mr. Serling. Next on Twilight Zone, an eminent performer of stage and screen, Mr. Richard Bayside, in an oddball excursion that we call Probe 7. Over and out. That stripped-down live feeling, it wasn't always artistic, it was survival. Sometimes the Twilight Zone didn't just tell stories about fate, it lived them. The Purple Testament aired on February 12th of 1960. In it, William Reynolds plays a World War II lieutenant who gains a horrifying ability. He can see a strange glow on the faces of men who are about to die. 12 wounded, 4 dead, all in 2.5 hours. 12 wounded, 4 dead. And eventually, that glow appears on his own face, staring back at him in a mirror. Now, the episode doesn't show his death. You hear a distant explosion. Your imagination does the rest. Rod Serling understood that what you don't see is always worse. People, cars, houses, the works. But something's wrong in the scene, something very abnormal amidst the normal. You'll see what I mean when next week we bring you Elegy by Charles Beaumont. It stars Cecil Kellaway. Thank you and good night. Here's where things get strange. On the very same day the episode aired, the very same day, William Reynolds and director Richard Baer boarded a small plane and it crashed. Both men survived, but the timing, well, that was impossible to ignore. An episode about a man who sees his own death, broadcast on the day its star nearly died in real life. Reynolds never made much of the coincidence publicly. He went on to have a long career in television, and he lived to be 90 years old. But for anyone who believes the universe has a sense of humor or something darker, the story lingers. Serling built the Twilight Zone on moments like this, the ones that blur the line between fiction and reality, the ones that make you wonder if the stories we tell somehow echo back into the world that created them. And sometimes, well, the echo is a little too loud. The Twilight Zone jumped from the Revolutionary War to the year 3000, sometimes in back-to-back weeks. The production didn't have the budget to build everything from scratch, so they didn't. The neighborhood in The Monsters Are Due on Maple Street, USA, late summer, a tree-lined little world of front porch gliders, barbecues, the laughter of children, and the bell of an ice cream vendor, was filmed on Universal's Courthouse Square backlot, the same set that would later become Hill Valley in Back to the Future. Spacesuits were repurposed U.S. Navy pressure suits, or leftovers from 1950s B-movies like Destination Moon. Roman tunics came straight from MGM's stock of biblical epics like Ben-Hur. Now, here's the trick that made it all work. Shooting in high-contrast black and white hid everything. Scuffed sets, painted plywood, high-tech consoles that were really wooden boxes with Christmas lights glued on. Cinematographers like George T. Clemens lit those borrowed sets like film noir masterpieces, and the result? A $50,000 TV episode that looked like a $1 million movie. And then CBS almost ruined it. In 1960, the network decided that the show was too expensive, so their solution, videotape, the same technology used for game shows and the evening news. 6 episodes got the treatment, including Night of the Meek, the Art Carney Santa Claus episode. Now you get up on your throne and see if you can keep from disillusioning a lot of kids that not only isn't there a Santa Claus, but the one in this store happens to be a wino who'd be more at home playing Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. Now get with it, Santa Claus. The moment that those episodes aired, well, the spell broke. Film had depth, shadows, texture. Videotape had none of that. Everything was brightly lit, was flat, harsh. Instead of a nightmare, it looked like daytime soap. The Twilight Zone didn't feel like the fifth dimension anymore. It felt like local access television. The experiment was so disliked that CBS quietly switched back to film and never tried it again. For years, those videotaped episodes were even excluded from syndication because they didn't match the rest of the series. Even as kids flipping channels at 2 a.m., we could feel it. The videotaped episodes didn't feel like reruns, they just felt like imposters. Serling proved that you didn't need new worlds, just the right shadows to turn familiar ones into nightmares. Hey, quick pause. If The Twilight Zone was part of your late-night childhood, flipping channels, lights off, volume low, hit that subscribe button. We do deep dives like this every week. Which episode messed you up the most? The airplane gremlin? The broken glasses? I know that did to me. Let us know. All right, let's get back into the zone. The Twilight Zone was never a big-budget show, but one episode pushed the limits of what a half-hour TV drama could even attempt. The Odyssey of Flight 33 was pure sci-fi spectacle. A Boeing 711 punches through time, first back to the age of dinosaurs, then forward to 1939 New York City. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Farber. We encountered some momentary difficulty back there, but as you can see, we're over New York City now and should be landing inside of... The show's title wasn't poetic fluff. Among pilots, the Twilight Zone was an informal phrase, a warning about a genuinely dangerous condition. During landings at dusk, dawn, or in heavy fog, pilots would lose the horizon completely. Sky and ground felt blurred into the same shade of gray. Without that visual line, the inner ear lied. Pilots felt like they were climbing when they were actually diving. That moment of uncertainty, when nothing looks wrong but everything is, was what many pilots called the Twilight Zone. Problem is simply that the plane is going too fast, and there is nothing within the realm of knowledge, or at least logic, to explain it. Unbeknownst to passenger and crew, this aeroplane is heading into an uncharted region well off the beaten track of commercial travelers. Rod Serling knew this fear intimately. Before television, he was a paratrooper in World War II, riding inside transport planes, surrounded by pilots who lived or died by those vague in-between moments. Serling understood something that most horror writers missed. Fear doesn't live in total darkness. It lives in dim light when you think you understand what you're seeing. And that idea echoes somewhere else, too. In oceanography, there's a region called the mesopelagic layer, between 200 and 1,000 meters deep. It's a world of permanent twilight. No sunlight strong enough for plants, but not complete darkness either. The creatures that live there have massive eyes, glowing bodies, and shapes that just feel wrong. Does that sound familiar? Well, it's the same space that Serling explored every week, a place where the rules of the surface world stopped working and strange things arrive in the gloom. Early on, Serling experimented with variations like the Zone of Twilight before landing on the name that stuck. But the Twilight Zone won because it sounded both scientific and poetic, authoritative yet mysterious. It is the middle ground between light and shadow, between science and superstition, and it lies between the pit of man's fears and the summit of his knowledge. This is the dimension of imagination. It is an area which we call the Twilight Zone. By borrowing a term from aviation, Serling made the supernatural feel like just another branch of physics that we hadn't figured out yet. And somewhere along the way, the phrase escaped the show entirely. It became a cultural shorthand. When something made no sense, but you didn't say, "That's weird," you hummed the four-note theme sound. One episode aired and you thought, "Did I accidentally change the channel, or did TV just get smarter than me?" In 1964, The Twilight Zone pulled off one of the boldest moves in television history. The ingredients? An American destroyer, the Pacific Ocean, and the ghostly sound of hammering from 30 fathoms below. They add up to a strange tale of the bizarre and nightmarish. Mike Kellen and Simon Oakland star in a very different kind of Twilight Zone, which we call the 30-fathom grave. Instead of producing an original episode, they licensed a French short film. Director Robert Enrio had already made the perfect adaptation of Ambrose Bierce's 1890 story and An Occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge for a fraction of what it cost to produce an original episode. CBS acquired the rights. No actors to cast, no sets to build, no locations to scout. It was essentially turnkey television. All they had to do was zonify it. Add Rod Serling delivering his iconic opening and closing narrations, and that was it. The rest, it stayed untouched. And when it aired, the difference was impossible to miss. This wasn't shot like a TV episode. It flowed like a dream. The camera moved with a fluid, cinematic grace that made standard television look stiff and artificial by comparison. It felt less like a broadcast and more like a memory that you weren't sure was yours. There was almost no dialogue, no speeches, no moral spelled out for you. Instead, you got wind in the trees, footsteps, birds breathing, silence doing most of the work. Heavy, heavy, heavy. For viewers used to Serling's eloquent monologues, it felt shockingly experimental. And then came the ending, the revelation that the entire desperate escape unfolded in the split second before the character's death hit like a punch to the chest. But here's the thing. The film had already won the Academy Award for Best Live-Action Short Film before The Twilight Zone ever aired it. Because the licensing was limited, it wasn't widely seen in syndication for years. It became the ultimate ghost episode, folklore that older siblings swore that they'd seen, but you can never catch yourself. And there's a final twist worthy of Rod Serling. The only Twilight Zone episode connected to an Academy Award was the one that he didn't write.